What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am the self-proclaimed wise and wonderful owl, a professional bookworm, and the quintessential nerd. And this is a new series that I'm trying on my channel called Dinner with a Bookworm, where we discuss 3 of my favorite things: food, books, and their adaptation to cinema or the silver screen in one way or another. Today's novel and adaptation is Between a Rock and a Hard Place, written by Aron Ralston, and the Hollywood blockbuster 127 Hours, which is an adaptation of this autobiographical novel. Tonight for dinner we have chicken burritos, and for my Hispanic viewers and the rest of the burrito eating community, I apologize in advance for calling these burritos, but I had the idea and I was really excited before I realized that I can't eat most of what's in a burrito. I don't eat beans, I don't eat rice, I don't eat pork lard, and I don't eat flour or cheese. So this is an embarrassment to the name of burritos, but it's what we have. And for our drink tonight, I have a Brazilian soda called Antarctica Guaraná. One of my favorite sodas of all time. So, without further ado, I am starving. I'm trying a new lighting system. I'm trying a new background. Please let me know down in the comments if it's working. I'm also using my phone to record this time instead of my tablet because the camera definition is better. I'm trying things. I've got a tripod coming. At the moment, you're being held up with some masking tape and a puzzle board. But I have a tripod coming. I have a ring light coming. So this should be improving as time goes by. So bear with me as I'm learning how to do this. But yeah, anyway. So let's talk about the novel. So the novel, again, is an autobiographical tale written by Aron Ralston. And it tells the tale, as you can tell by the book cover, of how he ended up losing his arm in Utah. If you have not read the book or seen 127 Hours, a spoiler alert is in order. But I don't know why you would be listening to a review of a book if you haven't already read it. But spoiler alerts in all of my videos, particularly with this series. For the burrito part, the shell is made with tapioca and eggs. It's called a crepioca here in Brazil, if you were wondering what the white stuff was in the intro. And then inside the burrito, I have chicken, a homemade salsa with avocado and bell pepper. So it's also a huge portion. I may eat it, I may not. We'll see how the progression of that food goes on through the evening. Okay, on to the novel. Overall thoughts of the novel. I was really hoping for kind of a psychological experiment, a psychological tale of what it's like to go through the trauma that he goes through in the novel. I got parts of that. I did not get as much as I wanted, and I'll explain in a moment when I go through the plot. It was interesting. I had this particular novel I read a couple of different ways. I read it via ebook, and then I also listened to it on audiobook. I don't do audiobooks very well. I have a tendency to tune out more often than I should, but I tried it, and I ended up finishing it because the audiobook cut out parts. I ended up finishing it with my e-reader. So the novel opens, and we're introduced, obviously, to the main character of Aron Ralston, and he is starting an adventure for a weekend hike, a weekend trip. He's a canyoneer, he's an adventurer, he's an outdoorsy person. And we are opening out on the scene of him starting this weekend in Utah. He lives in I believe he lives in Colorado, if I recall correctly, and he takes us through this kind of journey to get to Blue John Canyon in Utah. And along the way, he shares with us how the terrain changes from Colorado to Utah, to kind of the deserty landscape of Utah, from the trees to just a smoother plain. The desert can be really beautiful. I'm not a huge fan, but it can be really beautiful. He stops at a gas station and buys a few things. He talks about the drive, and kind of his favorite part of driving is being out there away from everything, about being away from civilization. So he gets to the turnoff, the trailhead of Blue John, which is not really on a map. It's kind of on a map, but not really. You have to look for it in order to find it. So, but that's what he says he likes. He likes kind of the remote areas that aren't very popular. He is a career outdoors person. He's a career canyoneer. Before that, he was an engineer, but he decided to invest in the outdoors because that's where his passion was. So he tells us about starting out, and he takes his backpack. He has a Camelback. A Camelback is a water bottle with a tube, the thing that bikers as in cyclists wear often. He goes through some of the supplies that he brings, and his plan is to be there for, I think it's like a 2-day trip, but this particular portion, he's going to ride out on his bicycle, go for a hike, and then climb down. I don't remember what the name of it is. I'm sorry, totally forgot, but there is a mountain pass shelf that he's going to climb down, and then kind of make his way back to where his truck is parked. So he takes us on kind of that visual adventure. After he's finished cycling, he tells us lots of details about that, how hot it was, etc. And then after he's finished with that, he starts his actual hike, his actual descent into Blue John Canyon. And along the way, he meets a couple of hikers who are also out there, which he thought was surprising, because it was kind of early in the year. Where the weather is not as optimal as it could be for outdoor hiking. To him, he thought it was perfect, but he said it was unexpected to see people during that time. But he ran into a couple of girls, and he helped them along their way. He took a picture with them. He has his camcorder, and he has a camera, which will come into play later in the film. He takes a picture with them, he helps along the way, and then he starts off listening to Fish, his favorite band, and then just kind of continues his pass into Long John. And he, in the novel, really describes what it looks like, the different colors of the metamorphic rock, the texture of the chalk stones, the S-logs, kind of this gauntlet that he goes through where he has to like climb down on his hands and knees, just as he's walking through this area of Blue John. So as he's going on, he's starting to kind of maneuver himself because it gets a little tighter, and you have to be a little more advanced to be able to climb through it. And he's descending this particular area of a canyon, and he climbs over the top, and he's like testing out this chalk stone that's caught between these two walls of rock, and then there is a chalk stone. So he has climbed over on top of it, and he's kind of hanging off to fall down. And as he does, the chalk stone, which is a combination of rock, it's a metamorphic rock, one of the hardest that there is, it moves, it dislodges. So he's falling and the rock is coming at him. So he puts his hand up to protect him, and the rock is kind of ricocheting. It hits his left hand on one side and then bounces over and hits his right hand. It traps his right hand against the wall, and they kind of slide down the canyon wall together. And then it gets stuck between the two walls of the canyon, trapping his right arm against the wall. And he describes it as having kind of a moment of shock, because now his left hand he can feel is in pain, and his right hand he can't feel. And then there's starting to be an ache that he's never felt before. And the first thing that he does, his brain goes is like, wow, one, I have to free myself. So while he still has that adrenaline going, he starts hurtling himself against the rock in front of him to get it off of his arm. And he ends up shifting it a little, but he said that just made it all that much worse. So he manages to get this 800-pound chalk stone to twist back to the original position. And he said by then the adrenaline has started wearing off, and now he's just positioned and stuck in a standing position between these two walls. I don't remember exactly how far down that it was, but high enough that if you look up, all you can see is just a small strip of sky, and then everything else is just this rock. So the story then kind of splits into 3 different narratives. We now have Aron Ralston present, trapped in the canyon. We switch to his mother and friends outside. They haven't realized yet, but they will realize that something is wrong. And then we have Aron Ralston in the past, where he shares with us some of his former adventures as an outdoor, there's a word for it, and it's escaping me. If you know it, put it down in the comments. As an outdoors adventurer, So we kind of split into 3 different things. So right now we're still in present Aron's predicament. So he realizes that he's trapped, obviously. His left arm and his left part, everything else except for his right hand. This is the position I'm doing because that's the position it's talked about. He's able to see his thumb. And then, so like the rock is here like this, he can see his thumb, and then he sees like this part is just covered by the rock. His thumb is just kind of sticking out a little bit of where the chalk stone is. And then he sees about this much of his forearm. And so the next thing that his brain is doing is like, okay, how do I get out of this position? Which is what anybody would do, really. So he manages to take off his backpack, and he kind of inventories what he has. And the first thing he does while he's trying to calm down and think is take his water bottle, and he starts, chugging some water, and then he goes, oh shit, I can't do that. Because he said that he knows that the water that's in that bottle, because his camelback is empty, from the bike ride and things like that, he only packed enough for the day. He was supposed to be on his way back, and there was supposed to be a pool that he was going to get more water from. And he realizes that what's in that water bottle he describes it as seeing life, literally. What's in that bottle determines how long he is going to live in this position until he is able to free himself. So he goes through a couple of the inventory. He's got some rappelling gear. He's got a headlamp. He's got a little bit of food for the day. He's got the water, his camera, a climbing harness. I'll put a picture here for you from the novel. And so he starts looking at his inventory and trying to figure out, how do we escape? Now, I'll admit that I don't remember. I was thinking about it today before getting ready to film this. I don't remember if he called for help or not. I know that he thought about it. But he also told himself that there would be no real point to try to get, I think one of the girls' name was Megan. There was no point in trying to get their attention because they had already been separated long enough that they wouldn't be able to hear him. And based on how tall the canyon was anyway, your voice only carries so far, particularly outside. Maybe he did. Maybe it was one of those he allowed himself. I feel like in my head he said, okay, if I'm going to scream, I'm going to allow myself to do it only for a short period of time, to help stop himself from starting to panic. And he realizes that in this particular predicament, he has 3 options. He can wait to be found, which is problematic because he didn't tell anybody where he was going. He said that this trip was a last-minute trip, and normally he's good about laying out a map and letting people know, but this time it just wasn't that way. He just didn't tell anybody. So if people started to look for him after he was due back, they wouldn't know where to look anyway. So then the option number 2 is amputating his arm And then, which he said, like, I mean, he's like, I'm not cutting off my arm. I'm not going to amputate my arm. He's like, that I'm not doing that. That's like the last option. And then he said the other option is that he could try to excavate the rock. He could try to chip away part of it to maybe be able to free his arm or what's left of it from the wall in between the chalkstone. Multi-tool. I'm sorry. Most important part of this story is the multi-tool that I totally forgot about, which was in his pack, was in his inventory. He said it was one of those cheap things that he got as like a stocking stuffer for Christmas. It wasn't designed to be like a Swiss Army knife. It particularly was lower quality. And it had pliers, it had a file, and it had a pocket knife part of that. And he was looking at that while he was thinking through all of his options and trying to see what the most effective tool would be to use. So he decides that his best option at the moment, if he has to do something, would be to start excavating the rock. So he pulls out one of the files on his multi-tool and starts chipping away. It would actually be more like this. Chipping away at the rock, trying to create a space big enough to get his hand free. After doing this for a while, he realizes that the chalkstone is too hard and his multi-tool is not designed for that. But it's better than doing nothing. So that's what he decides to do while still trying to think through the various options. And then as the day progresses, he starts rationing out the water that he has left and decides that the food that he has left, he will split up. He's allowed a bite every couple of hours because he doesn't know how long this is going to have to last him. Then he starts looking at his rappelling gear and his harness and stuff and trying to think of how he can maybe find a way to crane up the rock, to position it so that maybe he can use his climbing ropes to move the rock. He doesn't know how heavy the chalkstone is, but he thinks that he will be able to, maybe he'll get lucky and there'll be some way to maneuver it so that he can get out of in the position he's currently in. So I think if I recall correctly, this is when we start switching back to past Aron. I don't remember exactly when the cutaways are. I'm just going to kind of summarize them a little bit into one full thing. Because I'm going to be honest, I didn't find them all that entertaining. If anything, I think they took away from the story more than added to it. I recall there might be 4 cutaways throughout this part of the novel. And I think that's done on purpose. I think a lot of it is written so that it's what his mind is doing. His mind is also separating and flashing back to different things. That's not necessarily clear in the novel if that is what's happening, but I'm assuming as the reader, that's what's happening, because if I was in that position, that's what I would be doing. In the flashbacks, I can think of 3. One of which he talks, again, and all of them they're more indicative of him being irresponsible than and if it was a fiction novel and it wasn't a true story of this is what really happened, it would make more sense to have the flashbacks because it would give us some indication of what the character's skills are. And I don't know if that's the literary element that they were trying to use, that if that was the literary device that they were aiming for. I felt it was unnecessary in the novel because it didn't add anything. It just made me think like, wow, you really are dumb. Because one, he gets caught in an avalanche and he ends up suffering from frostbite. He starts suffering from frostbite on his hands. And he talks about having to warm them under hot water and the blisters developing because he wasn't properly prepared for being buried under snow. Another flashback, he talks about having an issue with the wildlife that's nearby and unintentionally taunting them by throwing rocks at them. And then another one, he talks about going camping and being really wet the entire time. I'm going to admit that part was really hard for me to read. I read it a couple of times and clearly it didn't stick as relevant in my mind. If I read this novel again, maybe it will make more sense now that I know how the story goes. maybe not. I mean, here's the thing. If it happened, it happened. That's irrelevant. So anyway, back to present Aron. We are coming up on the first night, and what he's realizing is that his legs are incredibly tired and sore from just the trauma of the day. So he decides to find a way to kind of rig a seat using his rappelling harness and some of the climbing rope that he has, and he's able to string it above one of the rocks that he has there, and kind of create a seat to take some of the pressure off of his legs. And so and then also the temperature starts to drop. And if you've ever lived in the desert, you would know that during the day it's ridiculously hot, but at night it also can get very cold very quickly. And if you're only dressed in a t-shirt and shorts, that is something that's likely to bother you, obviously. So he kind of uses like the plastic bag in his backpack and his headphones, and he uses the ropes around his legs to kind of make a makeshift shelter. And then he's not able to sleep. It's impossible to sleep really standing up with that much pain. So he says that he kind of alternates between chipping away at the rock to try to stay warm, and then also kind of sitting in kind of a leaning position is about how he describes it. So he says he just kind of alternates. I think it's every 15 minutes. It could be a little longer than that. I don't recall. Not a detail that was incredibly important to me. Sorry. So anyway, he alternates through that throughout the night. And then the next day is when he starts to set up and starts to decide to try to move the rock with his climbing ropes. So he kind of spends the day trying to move the rock because he realizes he can't really wait, because the logic of waiting, nobody knows where he is. And he's not due back anywhere for I think it's another 4 days, 3 days, 4 days. And based on the water and food that he has left, he realizes that he'll probably be dead before then anyway. So waiting isn't an option. And when he sees the effort that he's put into excavating the rock, he's realized that the more he chips away, the more the rock kind of settles between him and the wall. He said that the entire section that he had chipped away at has now rotated, and now it's settling even more on his hand. So he can't wait, so the next option is to try to move the rock. So he tries to string up a pulley, but he realizes that that's not going to work because he doesn't know how heavy the chalkstone is. But not just that, the rope that he has with him isn't a static rope, it's a climbing rope. It's designed to have a little spring to it, a little stretch, and it's designed for rappelling to protect you from impact. It's not designed to move an 800-pound chalkstone. So he realizes he can't move the rock. So his options are chipping away at the rock, more of something to do rather than anything else. And then he starts thinking through the third option of possibly cutting his hand off. And he's looking at, my neighbors are quite loud. I don't know if you can hear them, but I can. So he's looking through the materials that he has left and the resources that he has, and is thinking through all of them and seeing how he might possibly use them with the aspect of an amputation. He realizes that he'd have to use the multi-tool to actually cut through all of it. And he kind of thinks through using the padding on his biking shorts as kind of a protective area. He could use his backpack as a sling. But he has two big issues that he needs to overcome, one of which is a tourniquet, and then looking at his... Sorry, they're like right across the way, and it sounds like they're like knocking on my door. They're not, but it sounds like it. And then realizing that as he's chipped away, that multi-tool that he was using has in fact become quite dull. Not that it was ever sharp enough to really cut through muscle and skin, but it certainly can't now that he's been chipping away at the rock. So desperation kicks in as he continues through the day, realizing that he can't wait, he can't move the rock really, and he can't amputate his arm. So part of him starts realizing that he's probably going to die here. As his food gets down to almost nothing, he rations everything out, And by the end of day 2, he said he's almost out of the water. He figures he'll be through the water by the next day, which would be day 3. And then I don't know if he finishes the food on day 2, but I think he finishes it on day 3, if not day 2. So that's where he's at. So then he starts planning the best that he can. He realizes that he ends up using the bathroom, urinating in particular. And he decides to use the camelback to save his urine, just to have it in case he needs liquid after his water has run out. At the beginning, it is far too warm to experiment with, but he's aware that that may be an option. And then he spends kind of the rest of the day thinking about what would the dangers be of drinking the urine, because what it is it's salt and waste. Would that dehydrate him more, kind of like drinking salt water in the ocean, or would it actually sustain his life a little bit longer? This is also the portion of the story where he pulls out his camcorder and he starts recording his experience. He takes pictures with his camera. He starts kind of relaying this whole story to his recorder about being trapped in Blue John Canyon, explaining what, kind of what happened, and explaining everything I kind of just told you, that no one's going to be looking for him. And when they start looking for him, they won't know where. So by the time they are able to maybe triangulate his location and find his truck, they don't know which direction he went after that, after he got to the trailhead. If they're lucky enough to find his bike, he's estimating that it'll be another 5 days before they find him, and he'll be dead in 2. So it's important to mention the camcorder because that's kind of where the novel comes from. So I'm having a pause and thought of what happens next as he goes into the night of night 2. And I think this is where we transfer to the mom realizing that she hasn't heard back from her son in a while. And the whole portion with the mom, I'm probably going to just summarize the same way I did with the flashbacks. As the days go on, she realizes that something is wrong. So she does what she is supposed to do. She calls his roommates. She calls his bosses. The one of his coworkers at work is also concerned because Aron ends up missing several days of work. And then collectively they start a rescue mission the best that they can, trying to figure out where he was going, what he was doing, etc. And the overall theme of that portion of the novel is that, one, his mother and he have a very, very strong connection, and that's very kind of a driving force in his survival, is that she wants to see her son come home safely. And you really feel for her, that panic. There's a moment where she's trying to figure out the password to his computer and his email, thinking that will somehow help her. And it's a really sweet and tender moment. That's the part that kind of sticks in my mind the most, of her trying so hard for something that was going to end up being futile in the end, because he didn't tell anybody. But yeah, that portion just really lets you get to know mom, and it reflects on the relationship that they have. And it's a beautiful part that was not included in the film, which I actually felt was kind of a disservice. So that's all of what happens. So as we continue with Aron's story in the present, we have mom's story also during the same time as a continuous timeline that's going on, and you can kind of follow that along, and you kind of really feel for the mom in this story. So we go into day 3 with Aron, and I believe it is day 3 where we run out of water. And I think we're almost out of food, if not out of food, on day 3. And in his frustration, while chipping away at the rock, he kind of counts to 3 and then shoves the multi-tool into his arm to see just kind of what would happen. And then he realizes something else. It's not just muscle and skin that he has to cut through. There's a bone there. There's 2 bones actually in the forearm that he would have to get through. And the desperation really kicks in because he realizes that even if he could somehow manage to get through everything else, there is no way to cut through bone. There just isn't any way to cut through bone with the multi-tool that he currently has. And he gets really frustrated because now he's beating himself up for stabbing himself in the arm with a dirty blade that he's been chipping on a rock on for 2 days. He can't move the rock, so he's kind of in the state of just desperation, of just hopelessness. And now he is out of water, and there are some pleasant moments that he describes. There is a bird that passes over every day. It was a crow that passes over every day at the same time. He's timed it on his watch. And then he gets a little bit of sunlight every day, but otherwise the rest of the day he's trapped in the shadow of Blue John Canyon. And it gets really dark, not physically, but dark as in emotionally, when he kind of starts to come to terms with the fact that he's waiting to die because he can't amputate his arm, he can't get himself free, and he kind of goes through like missing his sister's wedding, and he reflects back on the past, and he has kind of this dark moment. And I could be wrong about the day time period. This could be day 4 and not day 3. They kind of blend together. And I know that for him in the novel, because he doesn't actually sleep, he just kind of shares what's happening with dehydration and kind of how it feels with the fact that he can't regulate his body temperature. He almost urinates in his pants a couple of times because his body is acting very, very strangely. He keeps chipping away at the rock more for something to do rather than having any actual purpose. And yeah. And then day 4 is when he carves an epitaph into the rock with his multi-tool. And kind of accepts the fact that he's going to die. And he just kind of shuts down and just realizes that it's over, and he kind of just gives up on this point. And I believe it's day 4. At the end of day 4, that means that we would have been at 48 plus 48 would be 96. Well, I have the days mixed. I don't have the days clear, so forgive me. So we continue into the next day, and I'm just going to call it that. We continue into the next day, and he has tried absolutely everything. And then it is day 4 morning. The crow that he's been watching for doesn't come. And then the morning of day 5, the crow doesn't come a second time, and he's starting to just really feel what I can't imagine, actually. There's not really a word for it, but it is quite morbid in what he is picturing. So he says goodbye to his family using the camcorder and says that anybody that finds this, please do the right thing and let my family know. And then he ends up, I think it's day 4, if not day 4, day 3. He does end up, in fact, drinking his own urine, and that is kind of what gets him through the next couple of days. But we go into day 5, the last day of his entrapment. And he has a hallucination, a dream, a vision of him playing with a little boy, which he says he knows is his son, and he knows this is something that's going to happen, not just an imaginary thing. And the dream is so vivid because what he sees is him playing with the boy, and he's missing part of his arm. Not the boy, Aron is missing his arm. And he takes it as a sign that, like, this is what I have to do. And then he notices that his thumb, the color of his thumb, is disturbing. So as he's just kind of poking away at the rock, he ends up stabbing his thumb, and he can smell the gases that are inside and the decay that's happening to his thumb. And it sends him into an angry, frustrated panic. And he starts hurtling himself against the rock, and he starts twisting and screaming and getting angry. And he realizes with the torque, as he did that, he can break his bones. He can break the bones that are in his arm. Once the bones are broken, then all he has to do is get through that tissue. So that's what he decides to do. He manages to position himself in a right way, and he twists his body up to break the bottom bone. Then he yanks himself down to break the top bone, and then he decides to start the actual amputation. And he starts starting with where he cut. He goes in and he starts trimming through and forgets to put a tourniquet on. Then he realizes he can use the camelback tubing and a carabiner to twist around to create a tourniquet. And he starts the actual amputation. And he says that there's such a relief that not just the pain, yes, there is pain, but he said it was a good pain because he's finally doing something. There's finally going to be an end to this torment of being stuck in the same place, awake on your feet for the last 5 days. So he starts the actual amputation, which is a very short part in the book. I kind of expected it to be a little longer and a little more graphic. The only part that he really describes graphically is the main nerve that goes down. And he said it looked like a piece of spaghetti. And then when he cut that, it felt like his entire arm had been shoved into an incinerator. So he ends up finishing the amputation. And he says that I think he said it took almost an hour from the time he started to the time he was able to actually free himself from the rock. And when he did, he's like cutting through and almost there. And then he kind of like steps back and he's free for the first time in days. He's able to take more than one step away from the rock. And I think my favorite part through all of this next portion when he's escaping Blue John is the fact that he keeps telling him, no stupid mistakes. Even though the amount of shock and adrenaline and trauma of being dehydrated and starved for that long, he still is managing to walk himself consciously through, okay, what do I need to leave with now? How do I bandage what's left of my arm? Remembering the map that he had and working his way through Blue John, the canyon, to try to make it back to his truck. So he ends up climbing out. He takes some materials with him. He takes like his rappel rope and his harnesses and things like that. And he makes it to the Big Drop Rappel, which is the climbing shelf that he had planned on. And at the bottom of it is probably what is described as the most disgusting pool of water I've ever heard of. But all he can think of is getting down to it, because when you have nothing, and you've been drinking your own urine for 2 days, I can't imagine that any water sounds bad. So with one hand, having just gone through an amputation, he manages to hook himself into the rappel and rappel down the big drop, and he gets to the water. He fills up his water bottle. I can't remember if he brought the camelback with him or not, but I know he definitely fills up his water bottle and he drinks. He sits there for a minute and he sips water, and then he starts just chugging it. And then he fills it up and he starts his walk out of Blue John. And it's a long trek. It's not, we thought that the amputation would be the easiest part, but it's not, because now he has to walk uphill in 100-degree weather. I don't know if it was 100 degrees, but I'm thinking desert heat, which is just not good. And he's also still low on water. And now his body is starting to fight against him from blood loss and from several days. He said that he had to stop and go to the bathroom several times because his body is just evacuating everything. And he's realizing that he's running through his water too quickly, and he doesn't know when the next source of water is going to be. So he talks about a warrior method from Native American tribes that go long distances without water, where they hold the water in their mouths, and he was using that trick. He manages to see the cave paintings, which is just a landmark on the way, meaning that he's doing what he should be doing. And the entire time you're just kind of panicked, like, holy crap. I mean, at the end of the day, we know he lives because he wrote the book. But still, listening to this harrowing tale is still quite fascinating. So he ends up running into a family on vacation, a mom, a son, and a father, who were warned that there was a hiker out based on the efforts of his mom and his coworkers and his friends. They were warned when they first got there that he may be out there because they managed to triangulate him from all of his activities. And they end up feeding him some Oreos, and they end up giving him some water. And the dad stays with him as they go to try to find the park rangers, and the mother and the son run ahead. And you can tell that his brain has started to shut down, particularly in the novel. And I think this part was really well written because the dad's trying to talk to him and keep him, okay. But all he can focus on is the sand in his shoe. That's the only thing he can focus on is the sand in his shoe. And he ends up sitting down and taking off his shoe to get the sand out of his shoe. And that's when the rescue helicopter finally comes on, and they manage to pull him in, and they take him to a hospital where he's reunited with his mom. And he kind of passes out during this point, where he does manage to make it. And then unfortunately, that's not even the end of it. He ends up having a bone infection that potentially stops him from going to his sister's wedding. He ended up making it. And then the rehabilitation and everything like that. But his prophecy, that dream of the little boy, ends up coming true. He marries his wife, and he ends up having, I think they have 2 kids now, if not 2 or 3. So he ends up having a son, and his mom is just so happy to see him. And that's kind of how the story ends, was just the relationship between him and his mom. And yeah, that's kind of an overview. It was a long overview of the novel Between a Rock and a Hard Place. So then we switch to the movie version starring James Franco. And I have to admit, plot-wise, they did a very good job of depicting, James Franco did an excellent job of depicting Aron Ralston. They filmed a combination of on location and on set to create it. The amputation scene in that movie was without a doubt the most believable amputation scene I think I've ever seen. The movie itself can get a little dry, and they add in a couple of things that I didn't think were necessary. They added in an old girlfriend that didn't play a large part in the novel. They added in, the hallucinations were really weird. They were not the same as they were in the book. They were like, there's one where he hallucinates an inflatable Scooby-Doo, because that was brought up in the conversation with the 2 hikers that he saw beforehand. There is an underwater cave scene with them that ultimately turns into like a sexual fantasy for him while he's trapped in the canyon. And I know that Hollywood does a certain, and if they didn't, I mean, the movie itself would be missing a couple of parts, but I think my biggest complaint with the movie in particular was that they didn't include the mother. And because she plays a large role in terms of finding him in the book, I kind of wish they had done that. Now, in one of the deleted scenes, she is included, but having not included her the rest of the movie, it just kind of feels just thrown in there. But overall, I would say that the novel and the movie definitely ran hand in hand with events and what happened. And after reading it and then watching the movie, I definitely felt it was a very accurate depiction. I really liked the movie. It's probably up there with a movie that I could watch over and over again and quite like, because I'm gruesome like that. And again, James Franco did an excellent job portraying Aron Ralston. There were some continuity errors I might complain with. Like in one scene, he takes off his watch with his mouth, and then in the next scene manages to have it on again. Also, Aron Ralston, while trapped in Blue John Canyon, lost 40 pounds. And James Franco did not, and also his perfectly not perfectly, but his groomed facial hair didn't grow at all, which I imagine would be something that would happen. And if you look at the photographs shared in the novel, you'll see that there is a change in appearance, and I feel like they could have done a better job of that part with makeup and stuff, but I'm nitpicking at this point. Overall, I think it was a very solid novel to movie adaptation. If you want a really good depiction of the psychological aspects of this, there is also a documentary called Desperate Days in Blue John or Desperate Days in Blue John Canyon. It is on YouTube, and that is I don't remember how many parts. It's a parted series on, it's not very long, but it's like a parted series on what he went through. I think it's like a 2-hour documentary. And that's when he returns to Blue John to walk the filmmakers through it, but also he goes and scatters the ashes of his hand, which was later retrieved by rescue workers. And he went back and kind of retraced his steps and did everything as a way to kind of overcome it. And yeah, just a really good, the documentary I think is probably better than the movie, just because it does actually have interviews with Aron, and they go and visit it, and he gets emotional, and you can kind of really feel it, what that would be like. And yeah, so before, I'm not going to finish my burrito in case you were wondering. I'm quite full, but as we wrap up for today, my ratings for the novel, I'll be honest, I kind of wanted more of a psychological perspective, and I feel like that was kind of short-sighted. I think instead of giving us all the flashbacks that didn't do anything for the story, they could have shared a little bit more of what it's like to be dehydrated for 5 days, or to starve, or what it's like to kind of come to terms with your own mortality. I don't know. I kind of wanted more of a psychological perspective, and I don't think that I got that. Overall, it is also kind of a slower read. It's not a long novel, but I had to read a couple pages over because I was like, wait, what? I was reading about a bear, and now I'm reading about frostbite. So a couple of times I had to reread a section. So I would say overall, I'd give this a 3 out of 5 for the novel, just because it is an autobiographical tale, and I did enjoy it. I did try it twice, so I have to give it that. I don't think it's the best thing I've ever read, and I think that there are better survival stories out there, but considering how unique this story is, I want to give it some credit. So the book itself, I would say a 3 out of 5. If you want to see the story in more of a Hollywood fashion, I would definitely go for the movie. I would give the movie probably a 3 out of 5 too. It's not the most exciting thing, and if you don't already know the story, it's kind of hard to watch. But again, the amputation scene in that movie is incredible, very believable, and the performance is absolutely outstanding. So I would say a solid 3 out of 5 for both. And if you want to see a better option for this, again, the documentary for Desperate Days in Blue John is what I would recommend. So again, thank you very much for joining me. I'd hate to say farewell, but saying farewell is sometimes a bold and powerful beginning. All right, guys, if you have a novel that you want me to read, please put it down in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. If you have more suggestions for how I can improve my overall outlook on this and my filming things, I'm still learning. This is still new. Yeah, other than that, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate all of you, and have a wonderful one. Bye-bye.